16-year-old activist Greta Thunberg has just become the youngest person ever to be chosen as Time magazine's Person of the Year. This is on the heels of her passionate message to the United Nations, which received broad, glowing coverage from the media. According to Time, in this speech, Thunberg cited more than 30 years of scientific evidence showing the consequences of a perpetually warming globe. Is this true? Let's look at just facts. During her speech, Thunberg did indeed say more than 30 years of crystal clear science justify her fears of global warming having catastrophic effects. But contrary to what Time reported, she cited no scientific evidence to support this view. Now, there are 30 years of crystal clear science related to the effects of global warming. So let's examine it and compare it to claims made at the outset of this period by high-ranking UN officials and EPA scientists. Exactly 30 years ago, in 1989, William H. Mansfield III, the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, wrote that global warming may be the greatest challenge facing humankind, and any change of temperature, rainfall, and sea level of the magnitude now anticipated will be destructive to natural systems like plant life. In reality, there has been a persistent and widespread increase in natural plant growth over 25 to 50% of the global vegetated area from 1982 to 2014. Meanwhile, less than 4% of the globe had less greening over this period. Likewise, average worldwide natural vegetation productivity rose by 6.2% between 1982 and 1999. Mansfield also predicted that forests would be adversely affected by global warming. In reality, the mass of above-ground organic plant materials in forests has remained stable since the 1990s. And most regions of the world are experiencing either positive or small to no changes in forest area or above-ground biomass. And from 1982 to 2016, the world's tree cover grew by roughly 7.1%, even though human population grew significantly over this period. 30 years ago, Sandra Henderson, a biogeographer at EPA's Environmental Research Laboratory, wrote that scientists are warning of a possible loss of 20% of the Earth's species before the end of the century, and a major factor in this modern species extinction may be global warming, due to increased concentrations of greenhouse gases. Given that 1.2 million species have been cataloged, a loss of 20% would be 240,000 species. In reality, there were 27 confirmed species extinctions during 1984 to 2004. Moreover, there have been only 6 confirmed extinctions of continental birds and 3 confirmed extinctions of continental mammals since the year 1500. In other words, the actual loss is orders of magnitude below the projected one. Yet Thunberg has been led to believe that entire ecosystems are collapsing and that we are in the beginning of a mass extinction. 30 years ago, Dr. David Rind, an atmospheric scientist at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies and a leading researcher on global warming, wrote that his agency's model's forecast for the next 50 years predicts an average global temperature increase of 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2020. As a result, he said that rainfall patterns would likely be substantially altered, posing the threat of large-scale disruptions of agricultural and economic productivity and water shortages in some areas. In reality, Earth's average global temperature increased by about 0.7 degrees Fahrenheit between the 1980s and 2010s, or by 1/5 of this projection. Also, in reality, rainfall measurements made at nearly 1,000 stations located in 114 countries found no significant global precipitation change from 1850 to present. Likewise, global observations reveal no significant trend in the areas under drought over land in the past 3 decades. 30 years ago, Mansfield predicted that food supplies would be negatively impacted by climate change, and that changes in rainfall patterns would disrupt agriculture. In reality, worldwide food consumption per person increased by 15% from the mid-1970s to late 1990s, and from 2000 to 2015, the portion of the world population that was undernourished decreased from 15% to 11%. Additionally, the average number of calories needed to lift the remaining undernourished people out of that condition fell by 49% from 1992 to 2016. The horrors predicted by Mansfield don't end there. 30 years ago, he wrote that global warming would spawn stronger hurricanes and typhoons. Though many people have been misled to believe this has happened, comprehensive global and regional datasets show that hurricane frequency, intensity, and duration have all been level for as far back in time as records extend. 30 years ago, Mansfield also predicted that human health would be affected because warming could enlarge tropical climate, bringing with it yellow fever, malaria, and other diseases. Populations of disease-carrying insects have indeed grown dramatically over the past several decades, but multiple studies find no reliable evidence that climate change is the reason. Instead, such increases correspond with decreasing residues of the pesticide DDT, which governments restricted at the behest of environmental activists. 30 years ago, the Associated Press reported that Noel Brown, a senior UN environmental official, says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if the global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. In reality, the net amount of land area on Earth grew by about 22,400 square miles, and the net amount of coastal land grew by about 5,200 square miles. Furthermore, increases in land area and/or human population have also occurred in areas considered to be highly vulnerable to rising sea levels, like the Pacific island nations of Kiribati and Tuvalu, the nation of Bangladesh, and the coastal areas of Florida. In her UN speech, Thunberg fretted that she is one of the lucky ones who is not already dying from global warming. But in reality, a broad range of environmental and human welfare indicators related to the effects of climate change have stayed level or improved over the past several decades. How can it be that so many people are unaware or misinformed of this? Let's go back again to exactly 30 years ago, when climatologist Stephen Schneider, creator of the journal Climatic Change and a founding member of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, told Discover magazine that in order to reduce the risk of potentially disastrous climate change, we need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. That, of course, entails getting loads of media coverage, so we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified, dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts we might have. This double ethical bind we frequently find ourselves in cannot be solved by any formula. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. I hope that means being both. Despite his willingness to tell half-truths and compromise honesty for the sake of being effective, Schneider, along with his IPCC colleagues and Al Gore, was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 for efforts to build up and disseminate greater knowledge about man-made climate change. The media has largely played along with this narrative by failing to inform the public of the massive disconnects between the predictions of climate disaster and the actual outcomes. What about the possibility that such catastrophes are just around the corner and we are nearing a tipping point? Thunberg believes adults don't fully understand the urgency of the situation and that we are on the verge of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. Such apocalyptic beliefs are common among young people. A recent survey found that 51% of U.S. voters under the age of 35 believe it is somewhat likely or very likely that the Earth will become uninhabitable and humanity will be wiped out in the next 10 to 15 years. Yet such assertions are strikingly similar to those of impending doom made 30 years ago. For example, the Associated Press reported that Brown said governments have a 10-year window of opportunity to solve the greenhouse effect before it goes beyond human control. Legendary physicist Richard Feynman was an extremely creative thinker who blazed new frontiers of science, but he was also a staunch advocate of the view that science must be grounded in practical reality. He expressed this by saying, "The principle of science, the definition almost, is the following. The test of all knowledge is experiment. Experiment is the sole judge of scientific truth." The real-world experiments of the past 30 years constitute crystal clear science, while the failed predictions of certain scientists and environmental officials have proven to be the antithesis of science. In her speech, Thunberg raged that people have stolen my dreams and my childhood, which is arguably true. However, she blames the wrong culprits. Her anxiety and desperation are not the fault of adults who act in accord with the facts of this issue. Instead, Thunberg's tormentors are the false prophets who have indoctrinated her and many other youth with unscientific fears of climate doom. I'm Amanda Reed Sheik, here with Just Facts. For thorough documentation of every fact in this video and more facts about this issue, read the article Climate Change Fears of Teen Activists Are Empirically Baseless at justfactsdaily.com.